back. I've got Mikaela Kiner on the line. Hello, Mikaela. How are you?
Hi, Michael. I'm great. Thanks for having me today.
Great to have you here. You've got a book, and I interview authors all the time, and I want you to share, what the book's about, and also why in the world would you give up so much of your life to write a book? Because it is a time-consuming thing, to say the least. And I've had a few of them out there, and I go, okay, do I want to dedicate my entire life to this? And some days it feels like you do that. But you tell us about the book and a little bit about your backstory and some of the great things you do.
Sure thing. So the book came out just at the beginning of this year in January 2020, and it's called Female Firebrands. It is a book for both for women, professional women, and their male advocates. And I wrote it mostly because of my own experiences as a woman working in both large and small companies, corporations, startups, and a lot of the challenges that women face as professionals, and especially if we're juggling both work and family. The premise of the book, though, was that I chose 13 amazing women who inspire me, and they range from founders and CEOs to social impact leaders and nonprofit, and just ask them each a series of questions about their challenges, but also how they got through them and how they came out as the successful and mission-driven people that they are. So I kept it really open, and then once I had met with all of these women, ended up writing about 4 themes, which we can talk about a bit later. But 2 things that I tried to do to make the book a little bit more different and useful. One was that it's written for individuals. So if you're a woman and you're being interrupted in meetings, or you overhear or experience an inappropriate remark, this book is about what you can do in the moment and how you can prepare yourself to respond to that. Because so many women are left, I think, shocked and silent when those things happen. And if their companies aren't yet progressive enough to have training and have processes and policies for how to handle these things, I wanted to give women those tools. The other thing that was really important to me is that men are such a big part of this conversation, and many of my bosses, sponsors, mentors, and advocates have been men. And yet I hear a lot of men saying they're not sure whether or how to enter this conversation, how they can advocate for their female colleagues. And so specifically at the end of each chapter, I included checklists, and one of those is a checklist for male advocates about some easy and approachable ways to get involved and start speaking up.
It's amazing you have those checklists on there. It's one of my favorite things about books, and not that I've necessarily done it, but I'm doing it with a new book that I'm writing. So apologies for the joke about why in the world do you write a book. Here I am writing another one. But I love that, because what it does is it helps kind of summarize, okay, what have you just read? Because too often, we read through things, so we don't necessarily retain everything. So it gives you kind of a highlight thing. And I love the fact that you have, that information for men to follow, to help their colleagues that are female in this type of situation. Because when you help each other, it makes things easier. And I think one of the things that you had mentioned in the pre-show was, especially now, not during the middle of a pandemic, but just at all times, the concept of being resilient in life and in work is so crucial. And so many times we get beaten down because of a variety of different situations. And if we don't have that strong resilience within ourselves, it's easy to throw in the towel, or just get disgruntled, or leave organizations, or burn out. And I know we talked about that, and we'll chat about that in a minute. It's important for each of us to have some resilience. So, what are some examples that you discovered when you're writing the book, and some things that you've implemented in your own practice of living, and how to be more resilient?
Yeah. It's interesting. Women are so often in a primary caregiver role, even when both partners in a couple are working full time. The women will take on far more of childcare and domestic responsibilities. Women also often find themselves caring for parents or caring for elders. And it's just really interesting how many women feel that self-care is selfish. What I loved about the women that I interviewed is that I think in order to get where they are today, most of them had to overcome that thinking or find a different approach that resonated better with them. And really, the common thread was that we've got to take care of ourselves. And many people use that analogy of putting on your own oxygen mask first before helping others. But just this idea that if we wear ourselves down and are, afraid and exhausted, we really aren't in a position to take care of others. And so bringing that importance back to self-care. I also think, and this is interesting as we've been looking at resilience right now in the time of the pandemic, because virtually every person in the world, I think, is experiencing this exacerbated anxiety, stress, and uncertainty. And if you go out on Instagram, I looked at the number, but there are multi-million posts with the hashtag resilience, and these are like beautiful, smiling people and inspirational quotes. But as I've been talking to a lot of women I know, our version of resilience right now, it might just be getting through the day. It might just be, I got up, I got my kids up, I helped them with their homeschool, I, relatively got my own work done, and I got some dinner on the table. And that's okay. I think right now, in fact, that's something to feel good about, because there's so much going on. It's just the world, just reading the news alone and trying to internalize and kind of cope with current events in and of itself is exhausting. And so finding time to then be productive and, take care of family, et cetera, it's really a success. And it's something like I want people to feel good about that right now, that says, hey, if that's all you're doing, more power to you, right? Because you're holding it together, and that's become a big challenge for a lot of people right now.
Yeah, I'm seeing it with working from home. I saw a study recently that 40%, or actually, there's been a 40% increase in the hours work on average for people. Now, people were working a lot longer hours before the pandemic. Okay, let's add on 40% more. Toss in, well, congratulations, you're now a full-time school teacher. You've got your partner, a spouse, whomever, working at home with you as well. So all those dynamics are kicking in. Be proud that you can accomplish anything right now. We're in the middle of a pandemic, okay? Now is not the time to focus on being perfect, because you can't be. That's just going to be failure. You're going to be stressed, burned out. You're going to end up in the hospital, which is the last place you want to be right now, because it takes away resources to address the people that are truly sick with COVID-19 or other ailments. You don't want to add yourself into that mix if you don't have to. So I agree with you. It's just there's so much pressure that people are putting on themselves often. Yes, there's some pressures from work, and we could spend a week talking about mismanagement and 8 billion Zoom calls and all of that type of situation. But at the end of the day, I think people just need to realize, let's do what we can do. If you don't get it all done, it's okay. The world's not going to collapse on you. The schools aren't going to be, oh, you didn't finish this assignment. It's going to be a case where these things are going to be fine. And I think, and I always joke about this because I have a lot of people that are in the education business that are family, friends, and whatnot. And I tell them, it's like, okay, all these parents are putting so much pressure on themselves to educate their kids. By the middle of May, every teacher is just as ready for summer break as the kids are. So it is, scale down. I know the school boards and administrators don't want to hear this, but it's cinema 1 and 2 time for a lot of these kids, because they just put on movies because they're done. They're just like, the kids aren't going to pay attention. It's too warm and all that. And they just kind of ease into the school year. Yes, there's exams and whatnot. And I didn't mean to digress on, bashing on education by any stretch. But again, parents have to pretend, or they shouldn't pretend that they're a school teacher. Most of them aren't. Do the best you can. Give your kids the education that you can. Anything that needs to be corrected can be corrected in the next school year whenever the kids go back to school. Don't worry about it. You're not going to stunt your child's growth because you didn't get through all 18 lessons in this math part. They'll pick it up. Don't worry about it. Just focus on your own well-being and your health. So I'll get off my education soapbox on that. I think one thing too, and you'd alluded to in our earlier conversation too, is with resilience, if you don't have it, you can burn out. And you'd mentioned, your own corporate burnout story. So I'd love with you to share the audience with, or share with the audience, I should say, what kind of experience you had with burnout back in the corporate days.
Sure, absolutely. So I spent the first 15 years of my professional career working in large corporations and some pretty, I guess I would say, intense and fast-paced organizations as well. And I think when you start your early career in a company like that, you don't necessarily know that that isn't a norm everywhere, or you don't know what other options and opportunities are out there. So throughout the course of having both my kids, I was working full time and, really was kind of climbing that corporate ladder. And, I guess I would say I found my own version of balance. I had both of my kids when I was working at Microsoft, and sometimes I would talk to other moms who were working there, and they would describe themselves as, well, I'm a bad mom because I did this. I put my kid in front of Disney while I caught up on email. And it was something that resonated with me. And I thought, I enjoy my career. I want to work really hard. At the same time, I will make a change before I ever feel like I have to say those words that, I'm a bad mom because I did X, Y, Z. And so that was a good lesson for me early on. At the same time, though, I think I reached a breaking point in a couple of different companies when I found that my own version of balancing work and family was just breaking down. And, I was too exhausted when I got home, or I was spending too much time between the work and the commute that I just felt like I wasn't seeing my kids enough. And there's a piece of that for me was in that first year with each kid. I just think the first year is really hard and exhausting, and it's a learning curve. And at that time, at least, there just wasn't a lot of flexibility in these big companies. There was very little in the way of work from home. Part-time schedules, didn't feel like an option. And so that was a challenge. And then I think even after that first year, you have, kids just demand flexibility. You want to pick up or drop off. You want to get to a school event or a play or a soccer game. And a lot of these things happen between those core 9 to 5 working hours. So for me, I, kind of juggled both as best I could. I worked really long and hard. And then when my kids were 4 and 7, we moved to India. I went on assignment and lived in South India for 3 years with my husband and the 2 kids. And that was a job that required travel, which I knew full well. But I ended up traveling back to the US 20 times in 3 years. And then I also traveled domestically at least twice a month. And it's even saying that now, I can't believe physically that I did it. I don't think I could do it again. But when you're on that kind of a wheel, and there's a lot of adrenaline when you're keeping that busy. And so, I made it through and had a good experience. And it was really only when we returned to the US that I felt like I kind of tanked. I just crashed, and it was like all of that busyness and fatigue caught up with me. And really, you asked about writing a book and what would prompt you to write the book. But we were sitting in the car. It was, just after we had moved back to the US. My daughter was in the back in her car seat, and she kind of launched into me with this series of questions that was like, why are you never home? How come you don't know my friends' phone numbers? Why is dad the only one that drives me to school every day? And that was a pivotal moment for me because she was asking those questions. She was 7. And I thought, those are really good questions. And I probably need to make a change to actually change the truth that is rooted in those questions. And I did. And that was when I left my corporate job at Amazon and decided to move into startups with this feeling that if I'm in a smaller organization and I'm responsible for a smaller, kind of more confined executive team, then at least I can be where I need to be. Sometimes when you're working in a big company, you feel like you're supposed to be in 3 places at once. You're supporting multiple leaders. And that really proved true to me. I found a lot greater balance working with some smaller and younger companies, and ended up going out on my own. But yeah, I definitely, I think what I experienced was that burnout is real. You know, if I would say, what did I learn at the end of that journey? It was that burnout is real, and it's both physical and mental. And it's not about just being tired. It's not just about, you know, I need a nap on Sunday. It was really kind of an ongoing state of fatigue that required a shift and doing something very different in order to recover from it.
Yeah, it's very similar to my burnout story, although I wasn't working for a big corporate organization at the time. But it's still, the fatigue part is just, that's the big thing. You know, you spend so much time doing everything you did in the travel. I mean, I was tired just with you explaining me the type of travel you were doing. I'm like wow. I mean, a single trip over 3 or 4 days is one thing, but you know, that many trips, because you know, for anybody that has a globe, from India to the United States is not a 90-minute flight. Okay, that's a long, long haul, and even in, you know, the size of India, you know, your flights, I'm sure in that country weren't necessarily short either, depending on where you were going. So, yeah, it's one of those things where that takes a toll on you, and unaddressed, it just lingers, and you could take, you know, a year's worth of Sunday naps and it won't make a dent in it because it's just eating at you. Now, you mentioned earlier there was 4 points that you wanted to make regarding the book, so I'd love to hear what you have to share about that.
Yeah, thank you. It was really interesting to me because you know, when I launched into the book and when I chose the questions that I would ask the women, I had some theories about what, you know, what might pop, what might jump out, and what might be common. And in some cases I was right, and then in some cases I was very surprised. So if I start with where I was right, there's a chapter that's called #Mom2, which is actually something that was coined by one of the women in the book. And this is all things pregnancy and parenting in the workplace, which was a challenge when I had my kids. And it's a very similar challenge today, although I'm really encouraged that there's more support and resources for parents now than there were before, although I think there's much more that's needed. Two chapters that really surprised me. One was that I ended up writing an entire chapter about privilege, and that was both white privilege and male privilege. And I guess when I set into writing this book, I never thought I'd be writing about privilege, although in hindsight, because I was writing about women and because I also interviewed a very diverse group of women, it shouldn't have been a surprise. I will say, though, as a white woman, I felt challenged in writing that chapter and writing about a lot of things that I hadn't personally experienced, not being a person of color. And I finally got the wisdom, I guess, to reach out to a colleague of mine, Aiko Bithia, who's a Black woman. And at the time, she was the head of diversity and inclusion at Fred Hutch Cancer Research Center. And she ended up collaborating with me on that chapter. Which I was extremely grateful for, and I think without her, I would not have felt comfortable having that in the book. Another huge surprise was female rivalry. And while I knew that there's competition between women, and I knew that it can have sort of a different vibe or a different feeling than competing with men, I was very surprised that all of the women I interviewed had a lot of stories, and some really hurtful stories about how they had been treated by women bosses, women colleagues, and, you know, using the phrase of like stabbed in the back, I was thrown under the bus, people gossiped about me. Even a story where Steve Johnson, who was a consultant, she came into a meeting room. She had just joined the company, and one of the women accidentally had her email up on the screen. And these were vice presidents. And this woman had announced her as the big new pregnant woman who's going to be joining our team. So, you know, yeah, things that are just sort of unthinkable and unimaginable, really, in this day and age.
Yeah, it's alarming, and I know we both know Marilena Faleras, and you know, her book that she wrote. You know, the stories in it or were appalling to me. Now, have I seen some of those things yes, but oftentimes when you have women that are in quote unquote competition with each other, the things that are said were quite alarming to me. Although I've seen it from a male side of things, but it's different. There's it just has a different appearance to it, and it may be from my own observation of things, but yeah, it's alarming that that's still happening. Here we are in the middle of 2020, and we're still dealing with all the situations that we're facing in the world and in the corporate setting. And it's going to be really interesting too, especially with work and what that looks like going forward, because you had mentioned when you initially worked for Microsoft, and working remotely really wasn't an option back then. I thought, boy, you must be a little bit upset now, because they basically said, yeah, everybody can work remotely, no big deal. And you're like, where were you back then? But different times and different needs apparently. But it's going to be interesting to see what the work dynamic is with workplace culture and all this, because I think a lot of organizations may consider having more and more remote type situations. So it's going to be interesting to see how the human dynamic is when it comes to competition amongst coworkers and everything else.
I think so. Yeah. And you mentioned, as a male leader, it can be hard to spot or understand that female rivalry. I think sometimes it can be hard for women too. It's covert in a different way. And so if I compare it to, Me Too, for instance, people have come at least to recognize, and we're familiar, right, with these stories and dynamics of that type of harassment in the workplace. I think female rivalry can be just subtle enough that sometimes it goes undetected and it's much less talked about. And so I love what Marlena did by writing, a lot on sort of the personal side of women competing with other women, and why we need to outgrow that and really get better than that. And I think those relationships between women are at the heart of it. And so if we can strengthen the personal relationships, the family relationships, then we can strengthen the workplace relationships as well. Your comments about the future of work, this is something that we're all watching and wondering about right now. And I know especially the larger organizations that I get a chance to work with are very much thinking that many people may never return to the physical office. I think a lot of people really look forward to a hybrid where they can work from home as much as they choose and take advantage of that flexibility, but also be able to drop in or come to a meeting, because people do miss that, just the camaraderie and connection that we have with our colleagues. But what I like about it is I don't think anyone is planning to just go back to normal. Everybody's reevaluating now what can be better and what can be different about the way that we structure work. And I think that's going to be a huge benefit to a lot of people. Working parents is one group, but so many people want more flexibility than we've had.
Well, with our aging population too, there's so many people that if they're not caregivers for their parents, they will be. And having that flexibility to take care of doctor appointments, or even young kids, taking them to doctor's offices or going on field trips or anything like that, that flexibility comes in. And harmonized working remotely type of environment, I hope employers will be a little bit more open to the things that they need to be open to.
Yeah, I think they will. And one silver lining that has come out of everybody working remote is that where there were people who were real skeptics, who didn't believe remote work was possible or didn't think that remote work was real work, that it couldn't be effective or it couldn't be efficient, are seeing now that it can be, and that in some cases it can be even more effective than it was. Or you and I were talking about travel, and there's business travel, there's travel to speak and go to conferences, and sometimes that's a great use of time. I think people are also going to see now why make a 10 or 15 hour flight to go to 1 or 2 days of meetings, maybe something that can be done virtually. And it's better for work-life balance, it's better fiscally for companies, and frankly it's better for the environment as well. So I believe that we're all going to be a lot more thoughtful as we go through this returning to work.
Yeah, I agree. It's going to be some interesting times, and I hope that everybody remains open-minded about it and not think about, trying to go back to the way things were. Because I have no problem saying this, the things that were happening before all of this weren't really working, and I think this is definitely an opportunity for many organizations and individuals to take a deeper look within and go, okay, what makes sense? What can we do differently and still be able to deliver what we need to deliver to our clients and customers and have a better work environment for everybody involved. So, Mikaela, I've loved our conversation today. Where can people find out more about you and this awesome work that you're doing?
Yeah, perfect. We are on social media, so LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can find me. You can find my company, which is called Reverb, and also the book, Female Firebrands.
And I'll definitely have that in the show notes. So, Mikaela, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate you and this awesome work you're doing.
Thank you, Michael. So good to meet you.
Likewise.